To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that we are on traditional lands referred to as Treaty 4 territory, and that the city of Regina is located on Treaty 4 territory. The original lands of the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we are committed to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration.
Well, it is my pleasure to be today with Mark Romano. She's a wonderful mediator. Mark is a qualified mediator by ADRIC. She has fulfilled the requirements to be on the Ministers of Justice list for Saskatchewan. Mark is also a qualified arbitration designator, certified employee benefits designation, and she's a registered nurse. Mark lives in Regina, is divorced with 3 children, and she owns Future Focus Mediation and Consulting.
And I'm pleased to work with Rainey Ortega Cubas, who is a civil law lawyer who is passionate about resolving disputes in a peaceful manner. Rainey teaches mediation and has extensive experience in conflict resolution. Rainey is fluent in Spanish. Rainey is a qualified mediator, arbitrator, and a parent coordinator. Rainey has fulfilled the requirements to be on the Minister of Justice list of qualified mediators. Rainey is married, has 3 sons, and lives in Regina. The definition of conflict, it's a struggle between people based on opposing views. Conflict arises because of the differences in the needs and values and perceptions of individuals. If you look up conflict, you'll find it's in one of the definitions we found is it's a serious incompatibility between 2 or more opinions, principles, and interests. And you'll hear us refer to those topics throughout the presentation. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide information of how we can effectively address conflict in our lives. Conflict is everywhere. It is a part of our life. In fact, it's viewed as we do research as a normal part of our life, a natural and predictable product of the interaction of people. People with different perspectives, values, opinions, beliefs, and interests. So if we recognize that we come at this from different perspectives, then we're more able to address the conflict in a meaningful, positive way. We'll be more readily able to choose a more successful approach to addressing conflict. There are advantages and disadvantages of conflict. We can look at one of the advantages is that every conflict will potentially lead to improved relationships as we learn to understand and better communicate our own feelings and transform our views and opinions to what was previously held. We can expose other underlying sources of conflict to prevent future conflict. We will promote communication. We also recognize that some of the disadvantages of conflict is that it can release some adverse reactions that we may have. There may be rage, fear, shame, blame. We may come to impasse. But again, if we can avoid conflict, if we can address conflict in peaceful, respectful discussions, we will come to more positive conclusions to avoid and address conflict.
Communication is the key to success, and we as mediators deal with communication skills. Part of our training, if not the totality of it, has to do with how we communicate and how we understand the communication of others. Communication is a skill that allows us to understand and exchange information, build trust, and clarify our desires. When we communicate effectively, we walk away from errors, misunderstanding, and frustration. All the stories about human relations are based on false assumptions and confusions about what the other people wanted. That is why we managed to always talk about what was the intention, what was the public impact, and what was the effect of what we did. So when there's a flaw in the communication, it's clear that we believe that we know the intention of the other people. And we presume that the reason that that person had were the majority of times bad for us. I like to explain this with an example. My sister was called to my nephew's school because the kid had bruises on his arm. And the teacher was very concerned that the child came to school with those bruises. So he called my sister and brought her into school with the psychologist, and they were thinking of taking measures about that. And fortunately for everybody, they knew what happened. My sister really pulled her child towards her because a truck was coming and it was going to be run over by it. So the kid finished with bruises, yes, for sure. But what was the intention of my sister? Well, to save the life of the child. So as clear and as obvious this example can be, and you understand that sometimes what the other people are trying to do is not really hurt you, but they want to save you, they want to help you, and they may well want to hurt you, but you don't know that because that is private. Their intention is private. What it comes out is public. So also, it shows how perspective depends on each person's history. It's important to know where the people come from. Things then having different meaning for different people. For me, if I'm talking about my mother's necklace, it may be something of a emotional value, maybe not worth anything in economical sense. But of course, for me, it has an emotional value. It has maybe memories that I treasure. And if somebody says, oh, this is worthless, they may not have been trying to offend me, but I feel offended because I may think that because they are offending my mom, which it could not necessarily be in their perspective, but they are just thinking about maybe it's ugly, maybe it's nice, maybe it's, I don't know, cheap. So somebody minimizing the value of a necklace might offend me or offend my mother, but from their perspective and their position, that is not necessarily what the person intended. So to resolve conflicts, we really need to separate the issues and understand that the assumptions are not necessarily right. Separating issues can help us to listen and process the problem. And that is when another skill comes in, and that is active listening. Active listening is using our 5 senses, even more senses, to hear what the other person is trying to tell us. How do they feel? What is their body telling us? Is it tense? Is it relaxed? How is it acting? How do the voice sound? Are they upset? Are they sad? Are they happy? Where is the emphasis? Any phrase can have different meaning according to the emphasis we put on the words. So, not to judge, but we try to bring the understanding. I remember when my middle son was age 5, and he looked at me and said, you have to listen to me with your eyes. And he is so right. This love and connection can only be given when we see each other eye to eye, when we are looking at each other. You know, we complain people looking at the cell and don't looking at you. And we say they weren't listening. Yeah, they were not, because they were not looking at you. So all our body is talking. We should look at our body. When we hear, sometimes we reminisce in smells, we hear different things and help us to relate. So active listening is a tool that allows us to connect. And when we connect, we lock into something wonderful, which is called empathy. And empathy is seeing how the other person sees what we're seeing. We may not agree on what they see, but we understand why and what are they seeing. So to be empathic, you really have to hear first properly. And this allows to connect in a very deep level of authenticity. Empathy is to offer space and attention to the other person. The biggest gift that we can give one another, it is our presence, fully presence, be there 100%. So empathy is not to judge or blame. We build connection when we are empathic and we connect with trust. So it is not being sympathetic, but it's when we touch our souls, we understand what the other person wants. And it really shows our intention to connect with the other.
We've used the illustration of the tornado of conflict to identify how conflict can escalate. We may have a very minor disagreement, and then we can judge, we can assume that the other person said maybe something hurtful, harmful, that it was deliberate. They were deliberately trying to hurt us. It could be wrong. We are just going on an assumption. But then when the next time we deal with that person, we may be more defensive. We may look for support and seek others' input into their views. And it escalates so that we have more and more animosity for this individual. And I'm sure you have experienced it not only in your families or in your workplaces or in the community, where a very small issue will start and will continue to grow and escalate, and the animosity, the anger, the conflict will continue to get greater unless it is addressed. So the sooner we can address conflict, the sooner we can avoid further animosity between individuals.
And when we speak of conflict, we also think that there are lots of things behind the conflict. And as I was telling you, and Mark was talking about as well, we have all these ideas and perspectives, and we don't see behind the conflict. We only see a position that is not something we care, something we want. We see an opposition of our ideas. And we don't like to dig into deeper. But have you ever encountered somebody that you thought, oh, I just dislike her? By any means, you were with that person for a while, and then you start digging in and you think, oh my gosh, she is nice. You know, I never thought that she thought that. And so it's because you connect and you understand that you had perceptions that didn't block you for understanding more. So once you have a conflict, it's nice to dig into what is that person thinking? What are the thoughts that she has or he has? What is the interior value of their desires, their needs, or their things? That is the subjective aspect that needs to be discovered. And those are the emotions, the interests, the concerns, the beliefs, the values, the needs, and the fears that we have to learn to see on the other.
So we've just identified a few reasons or why conflict arises. And these are only a few. There are many others, but they seem to fall into certain categories. In the structural situations, it's how the situation is set up, who's making the decisions. And I can see most of these structural types of causes of conflict will come from a workplace where there are supervisors and there are coworkers who may work within a structure that causes some conflict. The other component is values that conflict can arise out of values, that we all have different experiences. We may come from different cultures and our habits are different and our views on certain aspects are different. So these values may raise conflict when we have different interpretations of what's happening in our workplace or our home or our communities. The other thing is relationships. Again, Rainey spoke to this too, that we have maybe some misperceptions. We judge other people. We draw conclusions and assumptions about these individuals or what they've said or done that are not true, because we have not tried to understand why they said or did what they did. The other category is data, and that's simply facts, that some people will disagree in the facts, and maybe it's because of lack of information. Maybe it's the interpretation of the information, which I probably would say is most common, and then they assess it differently. And again, that'll be based on their experiences, their backgrounds, their values, their cultures, and they will come to different conclusions on those facts.
So when you have a conflict, the first thing is to begin with ideas. Be open to all the ideas to address conflict. Try to provide a safe and supporting environment to address the conflict. To be screaming at each other is not the best way to do it. You have to be peaceful. You have to be curious about what the other person is telling you. Conflict points out that we are different in some issues, but we are all humans. So look for common areas of interest. Look for what is it that they want. Are they talking about the job? They want the job to be more efficient. They want to have a more stable work. They want it to be more amicable. Explore points that both people care about. Conflict can allow us to identify different views to the same problem. We can incorporate those different views into creative solutions. A lot of our world today is done better because we came out with different solutions. So conflict, again, is giving you an option to be better. Brainstorm for ideas. Use word generation for solution options. Separate the people from the issues. The person you have in front has dreams, has desire, has needs, but you and them are seeing the things from different perspectives, different options. Explore hidden agendas. Review the priorities. So when you are trying to resolve a problem, focus on the problem, not the people. The wars are made because we make enemies of somebody which maybe didn't like something tiny from our culture. Try to use I statements. Give the benefit of the doubt to the other person. You don't know what they know. Address the problem, as Mark has said repeatedly, as fast as possible. Don't let it grow. Keep talking. Be easy to talk to. Try to be open and honest and have an open communication that flows. Identify and clarify the issues. Sometimes the words don't mean the same thing for one or the other. Seek common interest. Determine what are your goals. What is the other people trying to achieve? Provide the opportunity to recognize the other people and see things from their point of view.
So when you look at solutions to address the conflict, and Rainey's mentioned a number of items, explore all those options. And as she said, brainstorm. But we also have to do reality checks, because maybe some of those options may not be something that's going to work in our settings. So give it a second thought and then determine next steps. Initially, we want to analyze that conflict and look at back Why did it happen? Not to dwell on the past, but to sort of identify how it came to be. Set aside blame, set aside the assumptions that we had initially. Create a vision of how you will work together in the future to create a more positive relationship. Research on problem solving reveals that the effectiveness of solutions increases by 85% once the problem is identified. So again, try and identify the problem, do not dwell on it, but go forward looking for solutions. Outline the processes to prevent similar types of conflict in the future and identify lines of communication. But we want to address conflict in a peaceful manner. Some of these issues can cause a lot of emotion, and we want to ensure that as we address conflict, we keep our emotions in sort of a way that's still respectful, calm. To do so, we can practice some slow breathing, and this can be very, very inconspicuous in settings. We should avoid blame or shame. And that sort of touches back on using the I statements, that we don't cite you did this or you did that. We avoid the blame and shame. We focus on the future, try and set aside what happened in the past, look at the future. And if it's too daunting to resolve the conflict, long term, then look at it in a short term. Sort of take small steps if that's what's necessary for the people involved. And try and think about the 10-10-10 rule. How important is this in the near future and in the future down the road? How important is it to us? And accent on the process. How are we going to ensure that this resolution, this solution of conflict that we have raised or resolved, how will we ensure that that process follows through to ensure that the conflict is resolved long term?
Well, we have spoken about I statement, personal statements. And what is this? What I need, what I want. This necklace, going back to the example of my mom, is valuable because I remember my mom all the time with the necklace. And I have attachment to the necklace because of my mom. So the necklace means the love of my mom. And when you explain that to the other people, they get your feeling. I feel the need to talk to my mom. I feel the need to be outgoing. I like this. When you take and embrace what is the problem, the conflict, giving or not giving to you, then it's easier to know, even for you, what is it that you require. And the other people can see and help you that way. So it is important not to talk about the other people, the other person. I don't know what they are thinking. I don't know their perspective unless they tell me. But I can tell them what I'm feeling, what this thing means to me. And then we can come back and connect.
So again, we thank you for joining us today to spend a bit of time in learning a bit more of how to address conflict. It's in our daily lives, and hopefully we will try and work together to minimize conflict going forward and have more positive relationships.
We really thank you again for looking at us, for watching this webinar, and we are here again. If you have any questions, we create this webinar because you were kind enough to ask us about what was conflict about, and we hope that you know a little bit more about what a mediator does. Okay, thank you very much.